Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Trends channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The oppressive silence in the penthouse was broken only by the faint, rhythmic ticking of the grand marble clock, a sound that seemed to amplify the tension rather than mark the passage of time. Claire sat perfectly still on the edge of the plush velvet sofa, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were a bloodless white. She had been holding her breath, it seemed, for an eternity, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the meticulously constructed house of cards she had been living in to finally collapse. Across from her, Victoria Newman, her aunt, her benefactor, the woman whose trust she had so desperately craved and so grotesquely betrayed, stood with her back to the room, staring out at the glittering skyline of Genoa City. The view was one of power and privilege, a world Victoria commanded with an iron will, and a world Claire had nearly shattered with her deception. The air was thick with the unspoken, a chasm of lies between them that could no longer be ignored. Victoria finally turned, her expression not one of rage, but of a profound, weary disappointment that cut deeper than any scream ever could. "I need to hear you say it, Claire," Victoria said, her voice low and steady, devoid of its usual commanding warmth. "I need to hear the truth from your lips. No more evasions. No more stories." Claire's gaze dropped to the ornate Persian rug, her mind racing back through the months of the charade. The fake ultrasound photo she'd doctored on her laptop, the subtle padding she'd added to her clothes, the feigned morning sickness, the whispered conversations with a fictional obstetrician. It had all started as a desperate, twisted gambit to secure her place in the Newman family, to bind herself to them with a bond they could never question. She had seen the way Victoria's eyes softened at the mention of a baby, a new generation, a second chance at grandmotherhood after the heartache with Johnny and Katie. In that moment of weakness, fueled by a terror of being cast out, the idea had taken root, growing into a monstrous lie that had taken on a life of its own. She had convinced herself it was necessary, that the end, a permanent seat at the Newman table, justified any means. But now, under the weight of Victoria's sorrowful gaze, the flimsy justification crumbled into dust. The lie had become a prison, and the guilt a constant, gnawing companion. A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path down Claire's cheek, landing on the back of her clenched hands. This was it. The moment of reckoning she had both dreaded and, on some level, longed for. The exhaustion of maintaining the facade was a heavier burden than the fear of the consequences. She drew a shaky breath, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "It's not true," she whispered, her voice cracking on the words. She forced herself to look up, to meet Victoria's eyes, to witness the full impact of her betrayal. "None of it is true." Victoria remained motionless, her face a carefully composed mask, but a flicker of pain in her eyes confirmed that the words had landed like a physical blow. "The pregnancy," Claire continued, her voice gaining a sliver of strength born of utter despair. "There is no baby. I made it up. I faked it all." The confession hung in the air, a stark, ugly truth that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. The details came tumbling out then in a choked, broken torrent. The online research into pregnancy symptoms, the purchase of the pregnancy test props, the calculated timing of her announcement, to maximize its emotional impact. She spoke of the crushing loneliness she felt upon arriving in Genoa, the paralyzing fear that the family's tentative acceptance of her could be withdrawn at any moment. "I was so afraid of losing you all," she sobbed, her body beginning to tremble uncontrollably. "I thought a baby would make me irreplaceable, that you would have to keep me. I know how horrible it sounds. I know it's unforgivable. I've been living in a nightmare of my own making." Victoria finally moved, not towards Claire in comfort, but to lean against her desk, as if needing its solidity for support. She didn't speak for a long time, simply absorbing the magnitude of the deception. The trust, so painstakingly built after the revelation of Claire's connection to Jordan, was now irrevocably broken. This wasn't the act of a manipulated victim anymore. This was a premeditated, cold-hearted scheme conceived by Claire herself. Meanwhile, in the dimly lit, wood-paneled confines of the Genoa City Athletic Club, Kyle Abbott was attempting to lose himself in the mindless repetition of weights, The clank of iron a poor substitute for the satisfying crack of bone he truly craved. Every lift, every grunt of effort, was fueled by a white-hot rage that had been burning in his gut for weeks. The image of his wife, Summer, tears streaming down her face as she packed her bags, was seared into his brain. Her words echoed on a relentless loop. "I need space, Kyle. I can't do this right now. I can't be around you." And it was all because of Audra Charles, and by extension because of Tucker McCall and his chief lackey Holden. The business proposition Holden had dangled in front of Audra, a lucrative, powerful position that would require her to be based permanently in Paris, had been a masterstroke of manipulation. Kyle knew, with every fiber of his being, that it was a deliberate ploy, a poison pill designed to destroy his marriage. Holden, ever the puppet master, had identified the one thing that could pry Audra away from Kyle, and in doing so, create a rift between Kyle and Summer that would be too wide to bridge. He had played upon Audra's ambition with the precision of a surgeon, and Kyle had walked right into the trap, his own hubris and complicated feelings for Audra blinding him to the impending disaster. Now Summer was gone back to Italy, putting an entire ocean between them, and the life Kyle had fought so hard to rebuild was in ashes. The physical exertion did little to quell the storm inside him. It only amplified it. Wiping the sweat from his brow with a towel, he made a decision. Revenge was no longer a dark fantasy, it was a necessity. It was the only thing that would restore his sense of power, his manhood. Holden had taken everything from him, and Kyle was going to return the favor tenfold. This wouldn't be a simple corporate takedown. This would be personal, brutal, and designed to hit Holden where it would hurt the most. Kyle's first move was strategic, a feint designed to lull Holden into a false sense of security. He arranged a meeting, his demeanor surprisingly conciliatory. He spoke of the futility of their feud, of the damage it was doing to both Chabot and McCall Unlimited, and even, with a convincingly strained sincerity, admitted that perhaps he had let his personal feelings for Audra cloud his business judgment. He proposed a temporary truce, a cessation of hostilities, so that both companies could stabilize. Holden, arrogant and smug in his perceived victory, bought the performance hook, line and sinker. He saw Kyle's overture as a sign of surrender, the capitulation of a beaten man. He clapped Kyle on the shoulder, a patronizing gesture that made Kyle's skin crawl, and agreed to a cooling-off period. "Smart move, son," Holden said, the condescension dripping from his words. "It's time to stop letting emotions run the show." Kyle merely nodded, a tight, grim smile playing on his lips. Oh, emotions were running the show, all right, but they were his, and they were about to direct a masterpiece of destruction. While Holden was basking in the glow of his win, Kyle was already working in the shadows. His target wasn't McCall Unlimited stock price or its latest product line. Those were transient things. Kyle wanted to obliterate Holden's legacy, to tarnish the reputation he held so dear. He began digging, not with the clumsy tools of a corporate raider, but with the patient, meticulous focus of an archaeologist unearthing a tomb. He hired a discreet and highly expensive, private investigator to look into every aspect of Holden's past, focusing particularly on the early, tumultuous years of Newman Enterprises when Victor Newman was molding the young executive in his own ruthless image. The investigator struck gold faster than Kyle could have hoped. Buried in the archives of a defunct business journal, and corroborated by the faded memory of a retired accountant, was a story from Holden's rise to power. It involved a small, family-owned packaging supplier that Newman Enterprises had used decades ago. The company, owned by a man named Arthur Finch, had been driven into bankruptcy by a series of mysterious, devastating events. A key contract was abruptly cancelled under dubious circumstances. Their credit lines were suddenly called in by their bank, and a whisper campaign suggested financial instability, causing their other clients to flee. The Finch family lost everything. At the time, it was written off as a tragic but common story of a small business failing to compete with corporate giants. But the investigator uncovered memos and bank transfer records suggesting that Holden, then a young, ambitious vice president, had orchestrated the entire collapse. He had allegedly pressured the bank, fabricated the rumors about the company's solvency, and engineered the contract cancellation, all to force the owner to sell his patent for a revolutionary, eco-friendly packaging material to Newman Enterprises for a fraction of its worth. The patent had since made Newman Enterprises millions. Arthur Finch had died a broken man years later, but his daughter, Eleanor, was still alive, living a quiet, modest life in a small town a few hours away, still harboring a deep-seated bitterness about what had happened to her father. For Kyle, this was perfect. It wasn't just about illegal business practices. It was a human story, a tale of corporate greed destroying a family. It was the exact kind of scandal that would resonate deeply in a community like Genoa City, where family legacies were everything. It painted Holden not as a shrewd businessman, but as a predator who had built his empire on the ruins of other people's dreams. Kyle didn't go public with the information immediately. That would be too blunt, too impersonal. Instead, he arranged a private meeting with Eleanor Finch, presenting her with the evidence his investigator had gathered. He was the picture of empathy and outrage, presenting himself as a champion of justice who wanted to help her clear her father's name. He offered to fund any legal action she wished to take and promised to use his media connections to tell her father's story. Eleanor, initially wary, was soon weeping with a mixture of grief and vindication. She agreed to everything. The next phase of Kyle's plan was even more insidious. He knew that Holden's greatest vulnerability was his relationship with his children, particularly his daughter Lucy. Lucy, idealistic and passionate about social justice, had always viewed her father as a hero, a self-made man who played by the rules. Kyle arranged for the documents detailing her father's actions against the Finch family to be anonymously delivered to Lucy. The impact was devastating. Lucy, horrified and feeling betrayed, confronted her father in a furious, tear-filled explosion. Holden, caught completely off guard, tried to dismiss it as ancient history, business from a different time, but Lucy would have none of it. "You destroyed that family. You lied to me my whole life about the kind of man you are," she screamed before storming out, refusing to speak to him. The rift was exactly what Kyle had hoped for. He watched from a distance as Holden's personal life began to publicly unravel, the stoic facade finally cracking under the strain of his daughter's contempt. But Kyle wasn't finished. He wanted a public execution. He leaked the story to Christine Blair, knowing her history with the Newman family would ensure she pursued it with relentless vigor. The headline on the front page of the Genoa City Chronicle was a masterpiece of damning journalism. "Pillar of the community or predator? Holden's rise built on ruins of small business." The article was meticulous, featuring interviews with Eleanor Finch, copies of the incriminating documents, and commentary from financial experts condemning the actions. It was a scandal of the highest order. The board of McCall Unlimited was thrown into a panic, and calls for Holden's resignation began to mount. His business partners distanced themselves, and the social invitations dried up overnight. He became a pariah in the very circles he had once dominated. Kyle, meanwhile, watched the implosion with a cold, detached satisfaction. He attended a charity gala where Holden was also present, now a solitary, haunted figure standing in a corner, ignored by the crowd that had once flocked to him. As Kyle passed by, he paused, leaning in close so only Holden could hear. "How does it feel?" Kyle asked, his voice a low, venomous whisper. "To have your life systematically dismantled? To lose the respect of the people you love? Now you know what you did to me. Enjoy the space." He didn't wait for a response, simply turned and walked away, melting back into the crowd, leaving Holden alone with the ruins of his reputation. The revenge was complete, cold, and utterly devastating. It was a victory, but as Kyle stood there, a glass of champagne in his hand, the taste was ashen. The hollow feeling in his chest remained. Summer was still gone, and no amount of destruction he wrought upon Holden could change that. The silence in his penthouse that night was even more profound than the one Claire had endured, broken not by confession, but by the echoing emptiness of a Pyrrhic victory. The hours following Nathan's revelations are heavy with unspoken tension. Though the immediate confrontation has ended, neither Nathan nor Liesl can escape the magnitude of what has been uncovered. Liesl paces the room, her mind racing, replaying every word Nathan spoke, every accusation he leveled, and every truth he forced her to confront. She has always believed herself untouchable, able to manipulate, evade, and survive, but now the stakes are higher than ever. Nathan's knowledge is a weapon as well as a responsibility, and Liesl realizes that even the cleverest schemes cannot undo what has been revealed. Meanwhile, Nathan sits quietly, reflecting on the fragile balance between truth, justice, and the bonds of family. He feels both relief and unease. The relief of unburdening himself, the unease of knowing that the fallout has only just begun. Nathan knows he cannot contain the impact of his discoveries to Liesl alone. He begins to consider who else needs to know, who is vulnerable to the secrets that have been unearthed, and how each revelation could affect the people he cares about most. He realizes that exposing Liesl's crimes, even indirectly, could ripple through the lives of friends, colleagues, and even innocent bystanders. He thinks about his colleagues at the hospital, the people who trust him to act with integrity, and he knows that remaining silent may be morally impossible. Nathan understands that while confronting Liesl has resolved one immediate tension, it has opened a much larger battlefield, one where the past and present collide and the consequences may be devastating. Liesl, sensing his deliberation, grows anxious. She knows that once Nathan decides to act, there will be no turning back, and she begins to fear that the carefully constructed walls she built around her secrets are about to crumble completely. Nathan's thoughts turn to his father, the first terrible secret he revealed. The knowledge that his real father is a man connected to darkness shakes him to the core. Questions of identity, morality, and loyalty flood his mind. He wonders if the bloodline he carries predisposes him to the same mistakes, if he is in some way tainted by the past, and whether he can escape the shadow of a father he barely knows. Liesl, observing his turmoil, feels the weight of guilt settle heavily on her shoulders. She realizes that her attempts to shield Nathan from the truth have only deepened his pain. The very act she thought would protect him has now set him adrift, questioning not only her judgment, but the core of who he is. It is a moment of reckoning for both mother and son. Liesl forced to confront the consequences of her secrecy, and Nathan forced to navigate a reality he never asked to inherit. The second secret, Liesl's hidden crimes, brings its own complications. Nathan knows that revealing her actions could invite retaliation from those she has wronged or endangered, but he also knows that hiding the truth would compromise his principles. He wrestles with the idea of confronting other characters in Port Charles who may have been affected, balancing the need for transparency with the desire to protect innocent lives. Liesl, for her part, begins to understand the precarious position she has placed herself in. The networks she once controlled through manipulation and fear are now vulnerable. Allies may turn into enemies, and past rivals may seize the opportunity to exploit her exposed secrets. The woman who once thrived in shadows realizes that her carefully orchestrated world is now at the mercy of the very son she has raised. Despite the tension, there is a moment of quiet connection between Nathan and Liesl. They share a tentative acknowledgement that despite the pain and anger, they remain bound by something deeper than deception, blood, history, and shared survival. Liesl admits that, in revealing the truth, Nathan has forced her to confront parts of herself she has long ignored. She begins to see that her manipulation, however well-intentioned in her mind, has consequences she can no longer evade. Nathan, listening, feels a mix of sorrow and understanding. He knows that while Liesl's actions were destructive, she is still his mother, and her love, though flawed, has shaped the person he has become. In this fragile moment of reconciliation, both realize that their relationship may endure, but only if built on honesty moving forward. The implications of Nathan's revelations extend beyond their home. Port Charles is a city of secrets, gossip, and ambition, and once the truth surfaces, the reactions of others will amplify the drama. Nathan anticipates confrontations with colleagues, friends, and perhaps even enemies who will be drawn into the fallout. Liesl, too, realizes that her survival will depend on careful navigation, transparency, and perhaps even vulnerability, the very qualities she has long avoided. For both mother and son, the coming days promise turbulence, moral challenges, and opportunities for redemption or ruin. The storm Nathan has unleashed is just beginning, and the city, oblivious to the quiet tension in their household, will soon feel the ripple effects of two terrible secrets revealed. As the day moves forward, Nathan feels a renewed sense of purpose. He has faced truths he once feared, confronted deception that once defined his family, and begun to chart a path forward. Liesel, though shaken, begins to consider how she might atone for her past actions and rebuild trust, not just with Nathan but with those affected by her deeds. Both understand that their journey will be arduous, fraught with moral dilemmas, and shadowed by the lingering presence of past mistakes. Yet, in this moment of uneasy calm, there is a sense that the future, though uncertain, is now anchored in reality. A reality that neither can escape, but one that, if approached with honesty, may allow them to survive the fallout together.